Now, as usual, before we start, I talk you through the flower combination that we're using today. And I've gone with a bit of a Christmassy theme. We're in November, we're starting to come into that festive season. So I've been inspired by something I've picked up in the wholesalers this last week. And this is a Christmas wreath that would normally be hanging on your door or on the wall to bring that festive feel into the house. But I'm going to use it as part of my flower display. I have a picture in my head that I'm imagining my design to be when I finish. Hopefully it's going to work, but you know, like everything, it doesn't go right first time round. So we've got some golden oak. Now this is a sort of native tree to the UK. Looks a little bit like holly because it has some prickles on the end of the stem, and this is growing just in my neighbour's garden. So that's the golden oak, and I've got a few pieces of that. Then to contrast really nicely against the golden oak, we have aspidistra. Now this is most definitely a florist foliage. You can keep it as a house plant quite easily at home, but this was one you'd be able to purchase from a good florist supplies. So this is aspidistra, nice flat shiny leaf, and I'm hoping to be able to bend and twist those into a different shape into the arrangement. Then I have some of the needle pine. Gorgeous texture, very, very Christmassy in its appearance, and it also arches slightly, so we're going to get a nice bit of movement on the side of the arrangement. So a few pieces of those. Might need a little bit of extra to fill in at the end, but we can deal with that when we come to it. And then to pick up on the sort of coppery golden tones of my wreath ring, which was my inspirational material, I've gone with a chrysanthemum bloom that's very similar in colour, or the closest maybe I could get in colour. It's more of a salmon shade, but I thought that it was picking up on the same tones and colourings of that little wreath. So we've got 5 of the blooms. I've gone with a lighter rose. Now this one is called Hypnos, and it has a slight red edge to the petals. A really pretty, good quality rose that opens up wonderfully in displays. Then to give me some contrast in shapes and give me a bit of line shape in the arrangement, I've got this fabulous Ilex. So you might be familiar with this in a red colour. This is an apricot shade, and I thought it worked really well with this sort of peach and copper colour tones of flowers. And then to bring a bit of sparkle and a bit of Christmas zhuzh into the arrangement, I've used some garden hydrangeas, and I've just given those a little bit of a light dusting with some antique gold spray, again to help pick up on the colouring in my container and to link together nicely with the colours in my little wreath. And I think that's all of the flowers. I might, you know, I sketch these designs beforehand, and I have a rough idea in my head of how I think they're going to appear and the shape and the style that they're going to be. It doesn't always work that way, so I might need at the end to add a few little bits of extra material in, but we'll talk about those when we get to the end. And for a moment, we'll put these to one side, and I'll give you a short little video on how to construct your mechanics and how to get your floral foam attached to your container. I've brought the camera in a little bit closer so we can get a good look at how the floral foam is attached to the container. Now I have this tall, slim container. If you felt it was going to be a bit unstable, and particularly if you're a beginner with flower arranging, you might want to add some weight to the vase itself. So some sand or some soil or some gravel maybe that you might have in the house. You could have those decorative stones that you use for flower arranging as well, and that can be inserted into the middle of the vase, and it gives you that extra bit of weight and some more stability. Now I have a plastic cup holder on the top. Now this generally, not quite sure if these are still available at the moment, but they attach themselves to a base. They were probably very popular in floristry in the 90s, and of course like any good florist and flower arranger, we tend to hoard and hang on to different types of containers. If you don't have one of these, a plastic saucer that sits on the top is fine. But because this has this bottom section here, it allows me to get a little bit of extra weight into the container and creates a bit more stability. But a plastic saucer on the top there is adequate if you don't have one of these style containers. Now I've prepared my block of floral foam, and I've got some quite thick stems of flowers going into this design, so I've allowed myself quite a large piece of foam. That's just a little bit more than a third of a block. It's been pre-soaked, so it's ready to go, and I'm going to initially tape that onto my plastic container using the floral foam tape. Now I'm using the thinner one today because my stems are quite thick. I don't want to fill up and block too much of my foam there on the top. Okay, so hopefully we can find the end of the tape. It's just there. Now I'm going to have to put my glasses on so I can see this more clearly. Remember to always start your plastic tape on a plastic container or a base of some description. Don't start it sitting on top of the foam, otherwise it won't stick. And we're going to take the tape underneath my plastic tray and bring it back round, and I'm going to finish it off on the top of my foam, making sure that it's stuck quite firmly to the first layer of floral tape. Now if you attach it to the foam, it won't adhere. I'll just bring that forward for you, and it will eventually work its way loose. And you can see that I've pulled it quite tight, so it's almost eaten its way into the side there of the tape, of my foam. Now what I could do, there are two options here. If you just have the floral tape like this, then you would go back over the top and come down the side, so you are attaching your tape to the container. Then you would go around the outside with your tape one more time to make sure it's nice and secure. But I'm going to give you a different option today, just so that you have a variety of methods to use and you can learn different ways of attaching your foam to the container. Now, so I have some of this floral fix. It's almost like plasticine, a bit like putty. And what I'm going to do is cut myself a few little strips, so just over an inch. And then I'm going to run those, let's just pop this down, I'm going to run these around the top of the vase, and then my plastic container can sit. Now if I can get that open, there we are. So I'm going to sit these on the top of my container. I'm going to do that in 3 places maybe, around the lid, or the top section, the rim I should say, of my vase. Attach them there. Now what you need to be aware of with the floral tape, the sticky floral fix, is that if you allow dust and debris to affix itself to this section here, then it won't be as adhesive as we need it to be. So that goes around the rim of my container. Get that tape off again. It's a bit fiddly. Now what I've done is I've attached that to the top of the container, so now when I place my plastic dish back on the top, I have something for it to attach to and something for it to stick to and make it far more secure on the top of my tall container. Now if you don't have the floral fix like I just used, then you can run the tape back over the top. Now I'm going from side to side, and I'm making sure that the floral tape there is adhered to my container. Now the container is quite dark, so the green tape isn't showing up too badly on the side. If it was a white container, then this method maybe isn't quite so suitable, as it will be hard to cover that floral tape. But that's now given you 2 different options to secure your floral foam onto the top. And I'm just going to add a piece of tape horizontally to give it a little bit of extra security. Now you will often see that floral foam is just wedged straight into the container, but what will happen in that method is the water will drain out of the foam and it'll sink to the bottom of your container. Now if you filled it all the way to the top with some sand and the foam sits on top of the sand, then that will be adequate So the best way of resolving that is to line your container with some cellophane or a plastic bag beforehand, and it'll stop the water dripping to the bottom. The reason I'm sitting it on a plastic tray just like this is so that the water will sit in the top of the rim and it'll keep the floral foam wet. And it's much easier for me to top up with water to keep the foam wet and then enable the flowers to last that little bit longer. So that's the fixing of my floral foam. We're going to move the camera back again so you can see a full view of the design as it comes together. Now, to enable the full height of the design to be seen on camera, I've had to angle the camera lens up slightly so that you can get a full view of the design as it comes together. So I am cutting out the bottom of the vase there, but it's just this quite ornate, very textured, coppery sort of gold colour container that I thought would work really well with this type of design. Now, this has been really inspired by the line and the vertical arrangement that we did in the Back to Basics series right at the very beginning. And this is an extension, I suppose, of those basic rules that we looked at, using more flowers and some accessories to create quite an interesting design. Now, it's going to be front facing, so it's only going to be seen from one side. And I'm going to start by adding in this decorative wreath that we looked at earlier on. Now, what I've done here is I've just inserted, it's almost got a foam, soft foam back to it. And I've inserted 2 pieces of the kebab sticks. It can be a garden cane if you don't have kebab sticks. I've inserted those in, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that it's going to sit quite comfortably to one side of my design. I'm hoping that I'll be able to work with it in the arrangement as we're going along. Now, with a tall container, you need to be really careful of your actual weight, and you need to make your design evenly balanced from front to back. Otherwise, you've got the risk of that design falling forward and falling over. So by adding this extra weight in straight away, I'm almost creating an unstable design. So if you feel that as a beginner you're worried about the weight of your arrangement, you could always fill the base with something like sand or gravel. That will give extra weight and much more stability to the container. But what I've aimed to do there is to create that ring shape. So we're introducing a different shape alongside the different shape of my vase. So we've got something tall and thin, and then I've got that circular shape on the top. And it's roughly about 2/3 of the way down from the top. So my design is going to be quite tall this week. Now I'm going to start with my tallest flower. I might have to go and move the camera back again a little bit more just so that you can see the whole design. But I'm going to start with the golden oak. This is a lovely straight material, and it's going to give me some height at the back of the arrangement. And if you remember back to those Back to Basic tutorials, we can go 1.5 to twice the height of the container. For this one, I think 1.5 is going to be adequate because it's quite a tall vase as it is. And by going any taller, I think the design will proportionally look a little bit unbalanced. The container is thin and narrow. If it was fatter with a more decorative pattern on it, then I could go taller to allow for the heavy pattern on the bottom to make the top section in proportion with my base. And it's all about thinking about which part of the design is visually the most dominant, and it should be your flowers. Right, so let's go with my first piece of foliage, which is going to gauge the height of my arrangement. And what I want to do is make sure that my ring here becomes part of the design and it doesn't look like I've added it in as a bit of an afterthought. Now, my top piece is quite tall. It's out of camera view, so we'll just move the camera back slightly so we can get the full design in. Okay, so hopefully now we've got nearly all of that design into the shot, and you can see I've got that tall piece of the golden oak in the back. And to keep him company, so he isn't standing up there all on his own, I'm going to bring in a second placement alongside it. Now, if we look at the back of the design, it's very straight, and that would almost sit flat against a wall. But to enable us to have equal weight at the back and to stop that design tipping forward, we need to bring some foliage to the back as well. And sometimes I do this at the end of the arrangement, but today, because I'm in this tall, slim vase, which can be a bit unstable, I'm going to start adding weight in at the back straight away. And then I've got less risk of my design tipping forward and falling over. So for a moment, I'm just using some of the golden oak to come at the back. And if we have an imaginary line coming from top to bottom, then we've almost got a triangle shape forming there at the back of the design. And in a moment, as I add more materials to the front, to create the depth from front to back, I will bring materials out at the front as well. And that will stop your design looking really flat and with no three-dimensional effect to it. Now with my little, oh they're not little. So what I've done with the aspidistra leaf, if we use it at that full length as it is there, it's going to make the design very wide. If I just place that in as it is, we're going to have a really wide design, which doesn't, it's not in keeping and in style with the arrangement that I'm trying to create. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the leaf and I'm going to use that stalk end, the stem end, to pierce the leaf. So we go through the middle of the leaf and then I get a far more elegant shape. This is called enclosed space, where we have that gap in the middle. And now I've got a smaller leaf that will give me my widths on one side of the design. Now, I initially said in the introduction that this was inspired by a line arrangement, but it's probably going to end up more like the L shape that we did after learning the line, and that's because I'm going to make one side of the arrangement slightly longer. So you can see there I've tucked in two of those leaves quite close together to give me the side of my design, and then on the opposite side we're going to go a little longer, and I'm going to use these lovely pieces of needle pine, and it's a great contrast in shape. It's much fussier than the aspidistra leaf on the opposite side. And what I'm doing in this arrangement, we possibly haven't done it before in any of the other styles, is I'm grouping my materials together. So rather than equally spacing them out, so I have the same texture on this side as this side, I'm grouping the materials together. It's a more contemporary and a more modern style of arranging. So we have this cluster here of the aspidistra, and then I have this lovely movement from the opposite side with the needle pine. And again, like I did at the back there with the oak, I'm going to bring some of the needle pine towards the back as well. That's going to help me create some weight there at the back and hopefully make my design far more stable and prevent it from falling over. And hopefully you can start to see now that the shape I'm trying to create is tall, straight down the middle and over to the right hand side. So very similar to that line, L shape, sorry, not line, that L shape design that we did in the Back to Basics series. Okay, so that's my basic outline in place. I think we need possibly a little bit more foliage, but we'll get that at the end if I need it. Now what I'm going to do with my larger flower, my focal flower, the most dominant flower in the design, is look for the one that has the smaller head. And if I compare those two, you'll see that this one here has a much smaller head than this one. So this will create my focal point. This is going to be my flower that's the furthest away and is going to give me my height. I'm just going to remove some of the foliage off it because it can look a little bit untidy. I'm going to roughly estimate how long I need that flower to be, allowing an inch of stem to go into the floral foam to make sure it's nice and secure. And if I just turn that round, I might be able to work with this one facing the camera and go in to bring that in really tall at the back alongside that golden oak there. And that's going to give me the height of the arrangement. And then I'm going to do that nice staggered line down through the front to give us our focal line. Now, what I'm going to be doing at some point is bringing my flowers from the back of that lovely coppery colour wreath. I'm going to bring it from the back to the front. Now I have 5 of the main focal flowers, so at some point I'm going to have to decide when I'm going to bring them to the front of the arrangement. At the moment, if you see this one, the bloom there is at the back. I think we'll bring our second flower at the back as well. Now with a tall arrangement, you always have to consider inserting your flower stems quite deep into the floral foam because the counterbalance of that flower on the top, the minute you start to move it, the weight of the flower at the top will move back and forth and it will work its way loose from the floral foam. So the taller the flower is, the deeper it needs to go into the floral foam. I'm just going to bring that down slightly. And at the moment we've just got 2 flowers at the back. Now I need to start bringing this colour through the middle and out to the front of the design. And I've got 5 flowers, so I need to think about fairly evenly distributing them down through the middle. And I'm almost doing that staggered line again, that back and forth movement that we learnt when we did the line, and that brings us that central focal point. And these designs maybe look a little bit dated in today's fashion because everything has gone quite country and quite natural, but we still follow those same basic rules. With this one, I'm trying to create a little bit more of a modern feel, so I've gone with less foliages and more bold foliages. But the same rules apply to these very natural and simple arrangements that we're seeing a lot of on social media at the moment. Right, okay, so this was my larger flower. This becomes my focal point. And what I've done now is I've brought the colour down through the middle. So you can see now I've brought that lovely apricot colour from the back through the middle of the ring to my focal point here at the front. And if we look at it from the side, I've now created depth by bringing this flower forward as opposed to facing the sky or the ceiling. And then I've got a gap just at the bottom here to do my final chrysanthemum. And again, I've used a smaller flower because it's the outside of the design. A lot of people think this is the larger flower, but the focal flower comes 2/3 of the way down from the top. So this one, I purposely kept to one side because it's a bit smaller. And I often equate this to the size of your body. If you think of your hands, you come smaller and you get bigger and bigger and bigger until you come to your body. Your body is your focal point. And this is this flower, the focal point there in the middle. And then we get smaller and smaller and smaller until we get to the hands that would be top and bottom. People think I'm a bit mad, but you know, I think it's quite a good explanation. Okay, now I'm going to go slightly to the right with this one. So that we get that line moving over to where this beautiful foliage is on that right hand side. And now I'm going to start to introduce, we'll just get rid of some rubbish. I'm going to introduce the line material with my ilex berries. So beautiful shape, lovely texture and colour. And again, if we think about those principles and elements of design that I often refer to, we're looking to create a contrast in shape and texture. So this is obviously a round shape, and now I'm introducing a line shape with the ilex berry. Now, unfortunately, it's not as tall as I maybe would have liked it to be, and I can only work with the material that I've got. So we'll go as high as we can, tucking it in at the back so that we start that colour on one side, and what I'll do with this is bring it over onto the opposite side. And within floristry, this is what we call lines within the outline. And I'm going to look for the ones that have the nicer shape and think about where in the design they are going to work. So this one is angled down slightly, so this would look fantastic on the right hand side there alongside the needle pine, because it angles down beautifully, the similar shape to the needle pine there on one side. And again, if you think about this placement and this one over here, we have no connection between the two. They're very disjointed, they're sticking out at different angles. I now need to consider how we can link them together and bring that visual path from one side to the other. So again, look at the materials that you've got, see how they are angled, the shape they naturally grow, and then place them into your arrangement, making the most of the shape that they are naturally growing. Now I've got one here which is a very strange shape, and it's, well, I should call it a strange shape, should I? It's sort of angled in different positions, so if your eye follows these individual lines, it doesn't really know where to go. It's messy and it's very confusing. Whereas this one is far more elegant and much straighter, and your eye automatically travels the line from top to bottom. So this is going to work more towards the outside of the design. The line material is often better on the outside of the arrangement. And then what I'll do with this one, I'm going to cut them into individual pieces so that we can create a stronger focal section, and we can bring the shorter pieces in towards the middle. And hopefully now when I turn it round, we have a link between that top flower coming all the way through to the opposite side, and it makes your eye flow through the design far more naturally from one side to the other. Now I've got a few spare pieces, so with not to waste these, I'll use them again towards the back. It helps to cover the foam and it helps to bring some weight to the back of the arrangement as well. There we are. So we get a lovely three-dimensional effect, really good depth from front to back. Now I have one more leaf which I'm possibly going to tuck under here, but for a moment I'm going to work with my little rose. And what I'm going to do with the rose is almost follow that line of Now hopefully you can see why I put a fairly large piece of floral foam in at the beginning, because the stems on the chrysanthemums are quite big. And now I'm going to introduce a second flower, so we're going to look at this lovely rose. This one is Hypnose, really pretty rose, and it does open up beautifully. And I'm going to do exactly the same sort of method, start at the top, bring them down through the centre of the arrangement to create this focal line. And again, I'm a little bit limited with this one of the height, but hopefully we'll be able to get that up at the back, making sure that it's nice and firmly attached into the foam. Now, when we looked at the vertical design right at the very beginning and the L shape, I think I probably only used one simple flower selection, because when you're learning, it's far better to learn with just a limited amount of flowers. But today, I'm introducing a second line of material. So the rose is going to follow, if I can find some floral foam, it's going to follow alongside that large bloom. So you can see this nice paler colour again on that staggered line down through the front. Now I'm a bit limited now with space in the foam. And I often recommend that people think before starting their designs as how big their foam is going to be, how big their stems are, how many flowers that they've got, because quite often you can become a little bit unstuck when you get to this position because your foam just isn't big enough to take all those flowers. So sit down before you start, have a little think about how many flower stems you've got and how big you need your foam to start off. Right, so I've got one more rose, and you can see that lovely colouring again down through the middle. And now, hopefully, as the design is progressing and it is starting to come together, that ring with the decorative effect on it is now part of the arrangement rather than this great big circle stuck in the middle of a piece of floral foam. Right, so again, I'm going to use this rose to exaggerate that slight L shape. So not quite as severe as the L that we learned at the very beginning, but that lovely movement with the needle pine there is definitely making that asymmetrical design one side longer than the other. Now my final flower is going to be the hydrangea that I sprayed, this coppery sort of gold colour. And again, I'm going to add it more towards the centre here, so it creates a bit of dominance in the focal area. And I might need to thin the heads out. This is going to be a bit of an experiment first of all. We'll see how the head is going to sit quite comfortably in there. And that's worked really well. So it's covered that large piece of foam there on that side. And it's helping to exaggerate the focal point, the more dominant section within the arrangement. And what I'm going to do is create that same effect on the opposite side, but placing them at slightly different angles so they don't become, like I often say, those two big headlights positioned on either side. So that's my second piece. And again, I've chosen a larger hydrangea, a slightly smaller one, and then I'm going to use the final hydrangea, which is smaller again. And that's part of rhythm. That makes your eye travel from the bigger piece to the smaller piece. And it stops. If we put three in that were exactly the same size, they would all fight for attention and you wouldn't know which one to look at first. Now I have a few options here. I could, if I wanted to, bring it out to the side, but I feel it's a little bit large to come out from the side. It's very dominant, your eye will catch it. What I would rather do is bring it more towards the centre, and I'm just, hopefully, if there's enough room in my foam, I'm going to bring it here at the back. Now there's nothing worse than creating a beautiful design and then when you get to this stage it all falls apart because you didn't have a large enough piece of floral foam. So I'm going to put the glasses on. I think it will be easier. Now I've got to find a nice comfortable place to insert that flower. And yeah, that's worked quite well. And one of the reasons that I used those in the focal point was, of course, to cover my floral foam in the middle. It's also to create a more dominant section. But what it's also done is given me a link between the copper ring at the top and the copper base at the bottom. And that's what we refer to as rhythm and repetition. So I'm repeating the colour, this copper colour, through the middle to pick up the ring at the back. And I could have, if I had something, I could have used some copper twigs, copper branches at the back, and that would have carried the colour all the way through to the back. But I didn't have them today. So I think that's worked really quite well. We need a little bit of extra foliage here at the back. Just going to look at the front to see if anything needs improving. I think that's worked quite well. Now that ring now doesn't, you can't see the kebab sticks that are holding it up, which was very important because that's part of your mechanics. It now looks like an integral part of the design and it brings the colour from the top to the bottom really nicely. Now what I'm going to do with that last leaf, now I'm going to show you what I'm not going to do because it's always good to learn. What I'm not going to do is put it in as a whole leaf coming out at the side because it's really quite dominant and too much of a strong colour and a strong shape to go on the side. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to roll it so that I have a smaller leaf, a less obtrusive shape and colour, and I'm going to add it in at the back there where I had that piece of foam still showing. And a good floral design has height, width and depth, which creates that three-dimensional effect. And I think hopefully we've achieved that. Now I think I'm going to add just a little bit more of the needle pine in before I take a photograph of it. I just feel it needs a little here. But other than that, I think that design is completed. Now this one is the first of the Christmas designs. We've got a few different ideas that you maybe want to copy at home. If you don't have the ring, you can still create the design using a combination of Christmas flowers. If you don't have fresh flowers, you could use artificial and create something that you can keep from one year to the next. It's just as interesting to use a willow ring or something that you might have in the house that's a Christmas accessory. You could quite nicely hang some baubles down over the front of the container as well. And I think that's a good start to the Christmas season. Not your traditional Christmas colours, but for something a bit different and a bit contemporary, I really like it. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell if you want to be notified when I upload a new video. And we're in the process of putting some e-booklets together, so an e-book and some booklets and leaflets, which will teach you the basics, something that's printable and something that you can take home with you. And if you're interested, we will be promoting that in the new year. But for now, it's goodbye. Thanks for watching.